Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain and Logistics podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, Group CEO of Velvet Global. Our mission is to connect the supply chain ecosystem by bringing forward some of the most interesting leaders in the industry. It is my pleasure and delight to have with us today Duncan Angove, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Blue Yonder, a global leader in digital supply chain transformation. The company's AI-driven end-to-end software platform helps retailers, manufacturers, and logistics providers manage demand, inventory, and fulfillment in real time. Duncan brings over 25 years of leadership in enterprise software, supply chain, and retail, including senior roles at Infor, Oracle, and Retec. As president of Infor, for example, he helped transform it into the first industry cloud company with 60 million subscribers, leading to its acquisition by Koch Industries. And before joining Blue Yonder, he co-founded the tech-focused private equity firm Arc Spring, and he also serves on the board of Honeywell. Duncan, pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having me, Radu. Looking forward to the conversation.
Maybe let's start with yourself. And beyond the CV, which is definitely super impressive, and you've done a lot and achieved a lot in your career, usually there's some stories of key inflection points, key moments of time when something happened that really made you either achieve a breakthrough or really push your career to a new heights. Those moments when you look back and say, okay, these were the 2-3 moments that really made a lot of difference. What are those moments for you?
Yeah, wow, that's a difficult question. I was born in England, but I grew up in the Far East and the Middle East, like literally all over the place. And back then they didn't really have TV or anything, so my sort of imagination became my game board. And I think I always had a strong imagination anyway. So if anyone has a superpower, that's probably mine. And it's served me well around challenging conventional thinking and leveraging technology to solve problems, right? So I went to UCL in London and I was studying economics. I've always liked sort of theoretical things that abstract the world away into frameworks. And if you think about economics and technology and code, they kind of do the same thing. They're representations of the real world and how it behaves and if-then statements, right? So I was going to go be a trader in the city. And then one day I went to a job fair and it was Anderson Consulting, now Accenture. And I'd always been a coder. I'd been coding since the age of 12. Back then it was like a Commodore 64. And I suddenly realized that trading was really one-dimensional. And the neat thing about going into consulting was you get to write code to solve real-world problems. So that was sort of my first thing. And every company you went to, that was sort of what it was. And it just so happened that I was always using code to solve supply chain problems, right? Whether it was a warehouse or it was forecasting and replenishment, all of that. So that was for sort of the first thing. So it was, and it requires imagination, right? How do you go, first of all, diagnosing a business problem and then going and solving it. And then I was very lucky because I got to ride multiple different computing transitions through my career. All right. So the first one was with Retec, which was a, Oracle, the kind of open systems, relational database, Unix, which sounds ancient now, but it was modern in the 90s. And Y2K was looming and retailers were having to replace their systems and they didn't just want to put in an AS400, a mainframe. So they went to what was the next generation, which was sort of end-tier client server, had a web front end. So sort of rode Y2K and that computing transition away from AS400 mini computers to client server end tier, and also rode the emergence of omni-channel and retailing. And there were a bunch of big sort of business model shifts. Retailing back then was incredibly decentralized. The stores were the owners of inventory and assortment and pricing and all of that. And what this new technology allowed you to do was centralize a lot of that into a single merchant organization, which made them more centralized, right? So that was sort of the first one. And then when I went to Oracle and then ultimately Infor, it was riding the computing transition of SaaS. And, we built the world's first industry cloud. It was at the time, SAP and Oracle were focusing on ERP, which was horizontal, HR, finance, the back office. No one had attacked the front office, the kind of the operational side of it. And that was what we did with the industry clouds. And now I'm at Blue Yonder writing the AI transition, right? And how AI transforms software and business outcomes in supply chain. But it was always supply chain. And it was always the convergence of sort of business and technology and writing different transitions and having, you have to have a imagination and a mindset to leverage technology to transform not just software, but the underlying business model that companies and industries are pursuing, whether it was omni-channel or industry cloud or using AI, but reimagining the actual business itself. So those are probably the key ones.
Love it. And I love that. I was listening to one of your earlier interviews, and I love the analogy that you used with when we invented camera, and in general when we invent a new technology, the first mind, the human mind, is to use it on whatever is existing, right? So the camera was used to film theater because
Yep.
that's as much as
Yep.
we could think of at that point of time. And now with AI, and the power of imagination is extremely important. So I'd love to get your perspective into how this will develop over time. But before that, AI is currently, as a good friend of mine that was a leader in P&G said, the most bastardized word in all of media. It's a lot of BS. And I wanted to pick your honest opinion. How much of what's being marketed today as AI for supply chain is real, and how much of it is smokes and mirrors?
I mean, I think it's sort of, there was a lot of hype, obviously, and it was a little bit frustrating for us at Blue Yonder because we're sort of an authentic company in this space and have been for 25, 30 years. And I'll talk about that in a second. So a lot of AI washing, you could add .ai to your domain name and suddenly you were an AI company. And everyone sort of rebranded themselves the AI platform for whatever, right? And it's not real. And there are a lot of lessons learned around how you take what I would call sort of black box technology and apply it, and the change management and the process reengineering. And to your point earlier, don't just do what you've always done a little bit better with new tech, actually reimagine what's possible. And we see a lot of that. Now there's a lot of talk about, are we in an AI bubble? Is it overbuilt? Are we going to see a huge downturn? I think it's interesting. I mean, it's, again, you saw it with the dot-com crash in the early 2000s. Now, was that wrong? It's like Andreessen says, sometimes being too early feels wrong, but it's not. Like you look at pets.com, I actually have the sock puppet in my office. I found a copy of it on eBay, then Chewy came along, so it wasn't wrong, but like the railways were overbuilt. Right now, the railways turn out to be bad? No, they were fantastic. Telecom was overbuilt. No, it didn't turn out to be bad. It's going to be exactly the same here. I do think that industrial policy has unintended consequences, right? By depriving China of sort of really advanced chip, it forced them to use software to innovate. And if you look at the approach that DeepSeek and others have taken, they've used software smarts to solve the problem, whereas in the US, we're just throwing hardware at it, and it's a little bit lazy, so we'll see. We'll see. It's clearly the infrastructure build out in the US is a huge part of GDP and is probably disguising the true state of the economy. But anyway, to get to the core of your question, I would say a huge chunk of it is BS. It's not real. It's not delivering value. If you look at supply chain, it's always been the cradle of applying intelligence to operations. Back in the 1940s, this is where linear programming was invented to solve logistics problems for the war, right? It was the simplex a guy called George Danzig. And then we had integer programming, mixed with integer programming. It was called operations research. Remember, you went to university, you got an OR degree, right? So that was very early on. And then ML came along 20 years ago, and it was used to predict demand to drive supply chains. And then sort of Google and Facebook hijacked it for advertising. And then now Gen AI has come along. And if any category is going to figure out how to use intelligence to apply to operations, it's going to be in supply chain. And we've seen this movie over and over again. How do you get an end user, a business person, to actually trust a recommendation on doing something when they don't understand the logic behind it? And we saw the same thing with complex solvers, the same thing with machine learning, and now we're seeing it with Gen AI. So there's a huge change management exercise here, and reimagining what's actually possible that's completely new with this technology. So I think we're on the downslope, sort of we're entering we're in the disillusionment phase, and a lot of these AI startups are being kicked out, and companies are looking for sort of the pragmatic adult in the room that's seen this before and actually knows how to drive real value with it. We're generating billions of dollars every month for customers using AI at scale. We do 25 billion machine workloads a day in the data cloud, right? That's real AI at scale driving real value.
That's an impressive number, and I didn't know there's 25 billion a day, but it's just even hard to get my head around. Now, to your earlier point that humans don't necessarily understand how does the suggestion or the solution come out from the algorithm, and then you have the chicken and egg, who has the final say, the algorithm or the planner. I'm curious, in the long run, how do you see this progressing? Do you see the human becoming the coach, the supervisor, or the problem?
There's all the parallels people make to the loom weavers, right? And the Luddites and all of that, And so in the short term, there are going to be sectors of the economy and pools of employment that will suffer. But in the long run, it will benefit society overall. And there are a whole bunch of categories that will go away, and there'll be new ones that emerge that we don't even know about, right? And I always think in time frames. So if we talk about, autonomy, and not just in supply chain, but in different business functions, you could say accounting, legal, coding, all of these things, right? If you take a 20-year time frame, I'm 100% certain we'll see autonomy, right? If it's 10, I'm maybe 80%. If you get to 5, just your confidence goes down based on the time frame. We'll get there eventually, right? But I think there's a journey along the way. And in the short term, certainly humans are going to be massively in the loop. The irony is humans in the loop actually slow things down. So we're big believers in machine speed and precision. And ultimately, that's what in supply chains, it's what you want. You want to run as fast as possible. And speed isn't just about doing things faster, it enables fundamentally different things, right? You think about the early telegram, right? It wasn't just the fact that it was faster than letters, right? It actually enabled modern commerce. It changed war. It changed a lot of things. So speed is actually transformational. A human in the loop slows it down. Back to the change management thing I talked about earlier. When we first, this was 20 years ago, and we first introduced forecasting and automated replenishment in retail, the output of the system was called a suggested order. And a user could look at it and say, oh, that's a nice suggestion. And then most of the time they would override it. Oh, I know better. I'm going to override it. And then the next day or the next week, you would show them their override, what really happened and what the machine recommended. And they could see that machine was right. Right. And over time, they stopped touching the system and it became hands off. And we don't even call it suggested ordering anymore. The same sort of thing unfolds with AI and Gen AI. The nice thing about Gen AI actually is the explainability and the root cause and the reasoning part, right? It actually, ironically, you can use Gen AI to explain the results that come out of ML or a solver, right? And we've seen that composite intelligence sort of type of approach in a lot of different places.
And talk to us a little bit, because you have so many clients. You work with some of the largest companies in the world and also some of the smaller companies. When you look at what the most successful ones are doing versus the ones that, let's call it pilot purgatory, I think there's a lot of, I mean, this has been since you've been in 25 years, in much longer than I have in technology. There's always that those companies that will be so risk averse that nothing happens until they're really the last bottom of that industry that needs to implement, and then they have to push it through. Where do you see the ones that are really pushing ahead and running with it? What are they doing differently? How are they using specifically Blue Yonder, and what do they do in the way they partner and interact with you that makes it more successful to use Blue Yonder as a software and platform?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of two components to that. The first is data is the biggest problem. It always has been. Going back to solvers and ML and now Gen AI, it's the quality of your data, the completeness of it, sort of the overall consistency of the semantics across it. And in supply chain, you have to work with other companies, right? I mean, supply chains go outside your organization. So what is their data? What are the semantics there? Which is one of the reasons, but fundamentally, supply chain is a data management problem core. And when we look at projects and where companies struggle, it's always data. So that's the first thing. And it's why we built our entire solution on the AI data cloud, Snowflake's data cloud, was to basically go after the data problem first. And when you look at things like ML ops and now LLM ops, a lot of that focus is on data. And ironically, the first place we applied AI was actually to the data management problem, right? It was like a non-functional requirement to make sure that we had really, really strong data. So that's sort of the first component. It's companies that embrace that and understand the importance of data are the ones that do really, really well. And by the way, these models are only as good as what you put in. It's sort of garbage in, garbage out philosophy. And the ones that have really rich data, strong product attribution, all of that do really, really well. And build a semantic model across the entire supply chain so that your warehouse, your transportation, your stores, your raw materials in manufacturing, all of it are speaking the same language from a data perspective. And you're looking at things end to end. So that's sort of the first thing. The second thing is the supply chain software industry and supply chain in general is transitioning from sort of a siloed functional mindset to more of an end-to-end mindset. When you look at supply chain software, it's one of the few categories in enterprise software that hasn't been sort of platformed and put together as one cohesive integrated suite of solutions, right? It happened with Salesforce and sales and marketing, ServiceNow and IT, obviously in ERP. And ironically, in supply chain, the one place where all this stuff should be joined up and solutions should be talking to each other, it's still very fragmented. And it's sold to the business, and generally they have kind of functional localized incentives as well. If I'm a warehouse person, I have my own warehouse metrics. I don't care about anything else, and all I care about are the features of my WMS. Same thing in planning, same thing in transportation, same thing in order management, right? So what's happening is organizations are shifting away from that and saying we need a single platform of solutions that are designed to work together to enable cross-functional collaboration and cross-value chain orchestration, powered by all of this new intelligence, AI solvers and ML, to basically orchestrate the supply chain as one. And we've seen this, the leading industry here is automotive. And it's interesting because automotive generally are always the first. They were the first to do sort of just-in-time and total quality management, the first to deploy automation at scale. And we've now got 50% of the world's automotive OEMs on our Blue Yonder platform, and they've all gone with this idea of a single intelligent platform to orchestrate their supply chain to deliver sort of speed and precision, right, to their P&L and to their customers.
That's fantastic. Now, staying a little bit with winners and losers, in a sense that there's been this discussion that AI is for the big boys, which I don't agree with. But there is a reality that it does come with some pretty big costs, and it does come, even cleaning up your data is not necessarily, well, it's not at all an easy thing to do, and it requires a lot of effort. Now, my question to you is, how can a small and mid-sized company that doesn't have the budgets of a Microsoft or Google or Walmart or God knows what, how can they still realistically compete, and what can they do? And can they also come to Blue Yonder? Do you work with those type of companies as well? How would you play to that size of companies?
Yeah, so I mean, generally, Blue Yonder runs the largest brands in the world, right? As you know, across manufacturing and logistics and retail. And I mean, really at that end, the most well-known brands in the world, they basically run on our software rails, right? All the supply chains in the world. From a smaller company perspective, we generally don't go smaller than sort of a $500 million revenue size company. I mean, what we sell is like I don't know, the terrible analogy, but a Ferrari, right? You know what I mean? Because to these organizations, if you think about a manufacturing, a retail, or a 3PL, I mean, supply chain is their business, right? All the way down to a store. So it's so important that it runs phenomenally well. And the reason it's always been sort of a best of breed category is because sort of the ERP proposition of, hey, it's just good enough, but it's all on one data model and all works together, doesn't work in supply chain because the benefits are just too big. The KPIs, the basis points of improvement on any supply chain metric you care about is just too big to not have the best in class solution in the world, right? So that's generally who we serve. But we do have organizations that are scaling out of sort of a 200, 300, 400 million and have aspirations to grow to $1 billion that come to Blue Yonder. They've almost got to the point now where we're big enough and we're growing fast enough that we deserve Blue Yonder, right? So that's one aspect that we see. I think AI will be interesting, Radu, right? Because it's probably at the language model level, I think it's going to become commoditized, right? That's just, it's going to be very, very hard to at that level. And I think smaller companies that are growing can probably be more nimble. They can probably challenge more conventional thinking. They have sort of less embedded inertia and infrastructure that allows them to do that. And like most new technologies, it's sort of the innovator's dilemma. A lot of the really interesting innovation is coming bottom up, right? They may not functionally rich, but they're AI first. They're completely native. Now, they don't work at the really high end. So I think, I don't necessarily think they're at any big disadvantage.
Yes. No, but back to the movies analogy. I mean, if you look, we studied with the camera and what it can do theater, but now movies. So if you look now, you can pretty much with the AI, the quality of the movies that you can design and what that might do for Hollywood. And I think there was some significant investments from the Oracle's son, what's his name? Anyways,
Yeah,
Larry
Young,
Ellison.
yeah, David, yeah,
But
yeah.
I think we're going to see, in that sense, I don't know, maybe democratization is a bit of a big word, but it does enable at a larger scale companies at all sizes to do
Yep.
things better. If you have the courage and the ambition and the execution muscle to put it in practice.
I remember, like, God, it was 2.5 years ago. I was at a Honeywell board dinner and someone asked me, like, because ChatGPT had just emerged and all of this. And I said back then, I felt like the biggest, most disruptive impact to society would be media. And it's like, listen, it just like every technology, it'll come along and it will automate and make businesses more intelligent and it'll disrupt some job categories. But in media, all the things we're seeing, the automatic generation of text, of movies, of video, of music, of all of that, media is kind of the medium. It's what connects humans together. It's the culture, it's
Mm,
everything.
mm,
And that is going to be unbelievably disruptive, I think, to humanity, right? How it will reshape society, culture, all of that, not knowing what's real. And then, the interesting thing about us today versus other technologies is we're so connected, right? There's 8
yes.
billion smartphones on the planet, right? And they're all interconnected. So knowledge, information, bad stuff, like just goes everywhere instantaneously. So it's going to be interesting to see with sort of music and movies and social media and all of that, right? That's going to be incredibly disruptive.
Yeah, for sure. I literally had a moment like that today I don't know, I was on YouTube watching something and I'm like, is this real? Is it what I'm watching? Because
Yeah,
you can't,
no, it's so good. Yeah,
you can't
yeah.
easily tell anymore. Now, on the front of Blue Yonder, when you think 3 years from now, tell us what are the most exciting aspects and elements of the platform that will you will be able to offer your clients in 3 years from now, and what makes you excited about those particular aspects?
I do think the fact that the market has shifted to a supply chain platform mindset, like they did in every other category, and the benefits in supply chain are so much bigger than when it happened in the other categories. The
Mm,
idea that you are intelligently orchestrating at machine speed and precision your logistics operation with warehousing, with stores, with manufacturing, with customers on the front end and in order management, and the benefits that all of that unlocks are absolutely staggering. And the benefit statements that we've seen in the early industries that have gone to it are in the billions. And
mm,
it's not easy in supply chain because these are incredible operators that run these supply chains and they squeeze everything out of them. So to be able to come in with a new solution and have a step change in the kind of business benefit they're seeing is really, really exciting. So that's what excites me the most. We're almost in the early phase of seeing that whole transition that will now play out over the next decade as companies platform. And platform doesn't just mean put your data on a platform and have solutions that are designed to work together. It includes the entire network, right? That was one of the reasons we acquired One Network, because a purpose-built intelligent platform for supply chain isn't just the data, it's the network of all of your trading partners, your carriers, your suppliers, their
mm,
suppliers, all of that. And that's sort of what we've assembled over the last 3 years. And now we're deploying sort of these supply chain orchestrations on top of it. And it's really, really fun. My most like favorite metric in BY, everyone talks about growth and this and that and margin. Mine is number of customers we take live every day. 6 go lives every day all around the world across companies and industries, right? Like, and that's and driving billions of dollars of value, right? So
that's a
that would have
huge
been,
number.
yeah, 3 years ago, it would have been 2 to 3, right? So just the acceleration, the adoption of this mindset. And by the way, like I said earlier, having an adult in the room around AI, how do you really do it, right? What are the pitfalls, change management, data? Where does it drive real value? All of that.
Mm. And now piggybacking a little bit on the imagination side that you shared is your strong point. Fast forward 10 years. What's the AI driven shift, Duncan, that you think will happen in supply chains that will surprise most people? So I'm questioning you with a twist
Yeah.
that most
Yeah.
people won't even think that this will happen 10 years from now. Something that may even sound crazy.
Yeah. So what because of I have an imagination, my favorite genre to read is science fiction. Okay. And like really geeky science fiction. And the reason I've always liked science fiction is that when those authors go forward 100 to 300 years, you have to reimagine what life is like, what society is like, what businesses are like. You're almost like future casting. And when design thinking was the thing, like 10, 20 years ago, someone came up with the idea of design fiction, which I thought was a really clever idea. It was design thinking fused with science. It was called design fiction. And the idea was that you took your industry or segment of what you do, and you invited science fiction authors to write a short story on it that was set like 50 or 100 years in the future. Right. So it's something that we actually have adopted and do a little bit of. And particularly in the world of AI, the reality is really like no one can really predict just how seismic and how surprising some of these things are going to be. When the internet came along in 96, no one saw smartphones and Uber and social media and how that would actually transform society. It completely reshaped society. So I think the most interesting things, back almost laddering backwards on media, is it will be the second and third order consequences that we don't see. It's not just the core business solution, it's how it actually impacts society. Like, it's like the invention of the car created suburbia. Like no one knew that. And then the interstate was like, and the suburban, the interstate was the operating system for sort of Walmart and McDonald's, right? So yes, all these second order consequences. I'm reading a book on architecture, and everyone talks about how pretty the colorful houses in Amsterdam are on the canal. They're really thin. And the reason they're thin and deep is because they charge the canal tax, right, yes, for your waterfront. Right? So there's all these unintended consequences. And I think that's what we're going to see with AI that will surprise us the most is how it reshapes society. Like, does it fundamentally change our entire schooling system? Does it fundamentally change where we work? I think that's sort of, and what does it mean for Gen Z and the generation after that, right? That's sort of, to me, where I get some of the biggest angst. And I'm not necessarily saying we're going to introduce, universal basic income or anything like that, but it's those things that are interesting. I think the workplace, the idea that you have the impact of remote work on kind of bringing new graduates into the workplace, for example, like who mentors them, how do they grow, how do you build a company culture, values, behaviors, all of that. Now you bring AI and autonomy in it. And everyone used to say you take your HR parent, it needs to look like this, right? Now people are saying, oh, no, it should look like this because you don't need early career talent anymore. Well, if you end up doing that and it's magnified by remote work because you don't have any young workers and you don't have any offices, right? How do you actually, over time, like who actually comes up in the organization? So I think some of that is going to be the real shock to the system, is what it actually means for society, work. Like, work is a huge part of what we do when we live, right? So
meaning,
to me, is going to be the most surprising thing, is how it reshapes that and how quickly that happens. And does it result in sort of social and political unrest, right? Which is a lot of time you see it happen.
And I think it's maybe at the highest level is our notion of meaning, or what do we live for, and what's because ultimately what we started with, and we're getting philosophical, but just for a sec, the media is ultimately storytelling, right? Because we as humans create everything around it based on stories. Religion is stories, right? The society is stories, culture is stories. So we are getting to a point where there's a possibility that won't be in our control anymore. That some other, AI tool. I mean, hopefully there's a human. I mean, I don't know if hopefully there's a human behind it, but it can be created at scale by AI. That's number one. Number two, to your point, and to what we had earlier before we started the podcast, like what does that mean for our kids? I have two kids, 9 and 13, and back to the question, like what should they study? And it's becoming a question like
the most frequent question
I don't know. Because it's a moving system. And to tell you a really interesting situation that I was with the chief supply chain officer, and they make one of the largest in the world. They make shampoos and whatever, soaps, and let's say beauty and cosmetics. Let's put it like that. And he was explaining to me how in their India facility, they're starting to deploy humanoids. And those humanoids in India, Duncan, would pay for themselves in 2 years. So in a low-cost country, because India is not is not Europe, is not US, In a low-cost country, you're getting to a scale in which a humanoid robot can be paid within 2 years for itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the irony of all of this makes it that, then you basically would fire the workers that are humans that are buying the shampoo. You replace them with humanoids who don't need to buy shampoo, right? Obviously, they're much more productive,
Absolutely.
but you end up in a catch-22 where, like, well, society is like, but how do humans fit in all of this? And I think, it's really interesting, and there's going to be some societal driven questions that we will need to fix or find solutions to because it is also happening it seems to be happening fairly quickly.
Yeah, there's that old cliche, which is when people talk about new revolutionary technology, is that we overestimate the impact in the short run and we underestimate it in the long run.
Yes.
But then again, every S curve of technology has happened faster and faster and faster, back to the fact that everything is connected now, and diffusion of ideas and adoption. So it will happen faster than we think. And we probably are. I mean, this is the most revolutionary tech we've seen since really the internet and maybe even electricity, and it's going to reshape things. I mean, one thing that worries me a little bit is the algorithm. I think the algorithm has done a lot of disservice to society, and people, it's polarized people, and the algorithm feeds polarization, and just the whole responsible aligned AI thing. Some people spend a lot of time talking about it. Most people don't. It's the biggest thing. If this intelligence is being powered by an algorithm, and it obviously is the data that trained it has our inherent biases in it, and it's motivated to drive, well, back then it was motivated to drive eyeballs, right, and time on whatever you're doing. And
yes.
As Gleason called the lack of a payment protocol in the internet the original sin, and that's why it's advertising powered, and why we have these algorithms, and you know what I mean? And humans react to polarization and bad news and all of that, right? So let's not repeat that, as AI and media and all these really important things reshape society.
And look, I mean, to end this on the positive, I have a number of very bright friends that are working on standards and guidelines, and how do you make AI ethical and so on. So it's almost, as always in humanity, right? The good versus evil. It's becoming the good versus capitalism. I don't know how to call it, but I think it's going to be interesting for sure. We won't get bored. And to the point of Blue Yonder, I think you guys and what you're doing in supply chain will have a massive impact. Obviously, what has happened this year, and all the geopolitics and the constant disruptions that have become the norm, that will just mean that supply chains will continue to be at the core, the heartbeat. They've always been, but they were not necessarily on the CEO agenda. Now they're kind of stuck on the CEO agenda. And I think that's a good thing for companies like yourself, who can really fix and help a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, supply chains make modern life possible, right? They've lifted billions of people out of, into the middle class, and improved people's lives all around the world, right? And it's the operators that stand behind those supply chains, and the geeky, nerdy mathematicians that power it with intelligence, right? So it's sort of the unsung heroes of the world, but life wouldn't be possible without the modern supply chain. And most of them run on our rails. So we're happy to do that.
Super. Well, Duncan, it's been a pleasure to have you. Keep innovating, keep imagining better ways to do things. And thanks a lot for sharing today with us.
Yes, thank you for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Once again, this is Radu Palamariu. Thank you so much for listening to this Leaders in Supply Chain podcast episode. If you're listening it on iTunes, Spotify, or any other channel, we'd love if you leave us a review. And of course, share this with anyone you think might enjoy it. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.